to Windsor. So just real quickly, Windsor just approved our budget in June. It wasn't an easy job. It was pretty tough. Just like a lot of other jurisdictions in Sonoma County, we're struggling with our revenue, what's coming into the town. So we are taking a close look at all our departments, where we could cut back of. I'm really proud of the work the town did, though. We really want to have as little impact to our community as possible. But it will be coming back in October to get an update. So please follow what's going on in the town. Give us your feedback. Give us your ideas, your opinions, your suggestions. I hope you do know that Vice Mayor Potter and our newest council member, Jay Beleep, are here to listen and hopefully just communicate and figure out what we can do to make Windsor even more sustainable and better going forward. We did pass a really aggressive water capital expenditure, and it really is about the future of water. As we know, you probably heard waters. I don't know if Assemblymember has anything to talk about with water, Potter Valley, what's going on, but we really do have to plan the future generations in Windsor and how we're going to have enough water if something happens to our precious Russian River. So those are probably the two biggest items. Again, available anytime if you guys want to talk about anything else. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up, and I think Q&A is the best thing to do with our community. So please, I'm going to hand it back to our Assemblymember, Chris Rogers.
And I really want to start off by thanking the mayor and thanking the council members for being such good partners. So my assembly district runs from Highway 12 in Santa Rosa all the way to the Oregon border. So it's the third largest in the state of California. It's Sonoma, Mendocino, Humboldt, Del Norte, and Trinity counties. That means that we have 25 supervisors. We have, I think, 22 tribal governments and about 19 cities to partner with in this vast district. And not all of the issues that places in Sonoma County are facing are the same that's happening up in Trinity County or in Del Norte County. So we really do rely on our partnerships with our local governments to make sure that we're able to see how best to represent our community in Sacramento and how to try to deliver for folks. We also have really great partners as well, like Senator Mike McGuire, who encompasses our entire district, and Carlene is here and hates being called out for that, but on her team as well, and really makes things function. And so for folks who don't know me, my name's Chris Rogers. I served for 8 years on the Santa Rosa City Council. I was born and raised in Sonoma County and still live in Santa Rosa with my wife, and I have a little 13-month-old who's adorable and runs around in a puppy that was my puppy but is now his puppy. And I got into local government because I just wanted to make a difference in Santa Rosa. And for those of you who have lived in Sonoma County for a while, you probably know my time on city council was 4 wildfires, a pandemic, a drought, a flood. We even had an earthquake in there. And so it was really about how best to bring the community together to make sure that folks had what they needed to be able to be successful. Now in this new role, I started in December as the Assembly member, have an opportunity to work on public policy in Sacramento that really matters for our communities. But it is a vast district. We do try to be everywhere. And yes, these are the best formats for us to be able to have conversations with folks, to hear what's the most important thing on your mind, and be able to take that back. I like to joke, LA gets 27 assembly members. We get 1 for 5 counties. So really being able to take community voices back to Sacramento is the way that we're able to move the needle and deliver for folks. This year, our team introduced 16 pieces of legislation at the beginning of the year, ranging from things like water availability all the way to discount drug prices. We can talk a little bit about that. I serve on the state's budget committee, and specifically the subcommittee that deals with all climate action and transportation funding. And we can talk about that as well. And have been very involved in discussions around things like the reauthorization of our carbon credits, as well as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and obviously big local issues like Sonoma State. We can talk about that if folks want to as well. But with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you and see where do you want to start with our conversation. It could be housing, healthcare. Yeah. Go ahead. If you want to come up, or I'm happy to repeat the question, whatever works best for you. Yeah.
Hey, Chris, thanks a lot for what you do. I first encountered you on the Santa Rosa City Council back in 2017, and I admire where you've gone.
No, thank you.
I think we're lucky to have you represent us.
Thank you.
there's a couple things. One of them is the plastics issue, which I'm not going to get into because I'm sure somebody else will, but being able to, what are we going to do about toxics in our environment? And plastic has just taken over as a huge, huge problem, and it becomes, the awareness is even more prevalent every day with people understanding more about how bad it is. But what I want to ask you about, and what, if anything you can do, is AB 470 McKinnon, the AT&T is trying to get out of their carrier of last resort, and we live out in the country, have very limited cell reception, and during the 2019 Kincaid fire, had we not had a copper POTS landline, we might not have heard about the evacuation notice, and I might not be talking to you.
Yeah.
So that unfortunately in politics there's a lot of things that happen, and you talk about politicians being influenced and things. Well, I am concerned about that. And AT&T is a big corporation, and AB 470 is about giving AT&T off the hook, and the California Public Utilities Commission should not go along with this. So
Yep.
We're very concerned about it. There's people all up and down California. I've spoken at other meetings, and there's a lot of activists. So anything you can do, any thoughts you have would be very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So how about I'll start with plastics, and then I'll get to carrier of last resort right after that. So yeah, plastic pollution is a huge problem. We're encountering it, especially in the healthcare space. My favorite data point to remind people is that every single piece of plastic that's ever been made is still in existence, because plastics don't go away. They typically break down into microplastics that get into waterways and get into our bodies ultimately. There was a study that was done about 2 years ago where they tested breast milk and found that 72% of all of the breast milk that they tested had microplastics in it. And so that's passing on from generation to generation, this impact. So you do see legislation that's working its way through to try to address the actual production side of plastics, to make sure that there's some user responsibility and there's some corporate responsibility in that plastics and the reuse of it and taking it back in. You have two bills in particular that have been working their way through this year that are really trying to deal with some of that component. You have Ben Allen, who's a senator, who has a bill to require, it's called tethering, where the plastic caps for bottles in Europe are required to be tethered to the bottle. It's the largest piece of plastic trash that they find in Europe. And so it would require manufacturers in California to do the same thing. So if you have a plastic Diet Coke and it's got your cap on it, that the cap actually unscrews but stays attached to the bottle so it doesn't become additional trash and can be reused later. So that's one bill. Haven't seen it in my committees yet, but it's been working its way. The second one, which I was supportive of, was Assemblymember Tasha Borner, who has a bill about the microplastic beads that make their way into cosmetic products. Because then when people wash them off, they get into the waterways, and making sure that there's some responsibility there as well. So you do have a focus on that. And you also see little, I shouldn't say little, community groups that are popping up that are really concerned around plastic grass and the use of AstroTurf fields and the impact that that's having both on the health of kids, because it heats up and you see additional injuries as a result of it, but also the long-term viability of those, because there really is no way to reuse them or to recycle them. So that conversation's moving. Then the second question was about carrier of last resort. And so I think you described it well, but basically carrier of last resort was a requirement that was put on telecom providers to essentially have a monopoly when telecom was expanding. And the requirement was that they had to maintain copper lines and accessibility for folks, especially in rural areas, to be able to have 911 services and to be able to have emergency contacts. What has been happening is this discussion where some of the technologies that have been used are now outdated, but you still have this digital divide that exists within California, where some areas have new technologies that make that fiber obsolete, or excuse me, that copper obsolete because they have fiber, while other communities, roughly like our North Coast communities, don't have that, and they've never had that level of investment from telecom to be able to make up for that. So there's a bill that's been working its way through the legislature all year by Tina McKinnon, AB 470, that would have created a new process wherein which telecom could be moved out of this carrier of last resort status which would save them money, and also had concerns, particularly in rural areas, about how we were going to be able to get those emergency notifications. I was able to successfully negotiate with the author and with the sponsors of the bill, and so we have exempted all rural communities from that bill. So Sonoma County, Mendocino County, Humboldt, Del Norte, Trinity, none of it applies to our communities. What it is now focused on is specifically places like LA that have multiple providers that say that in the instance that there's at least 3 valid providers and that there is at least 1 hardwired provider in those communities, that at that point the CPUC can remove the carrier of last resort. That does not apply to our area, though, only to what they've documented as, they call it well-served communities. And well-served communities is based on the amount of providers, the amount of population, but none of it applies to our area. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and so when it came to our subcommittee, I serve on the Communications and Conveyance Committee, which oversees telecom legislation, also things like party buses and Ubers. It's a very interesting committee. But when that bill came to our committee, I actually brought up the fact that the issue is not wanting to maintain copper because we like copper. The issue is the failure of telecoms to invest in communities to provide the new technologies we needed, and that if what they wanted to do was change their carrier of last resort once they've already been able to upgrade us to fiber or other new technologies that allow the community, then that was a different conversation. I think that that's the only way that they see that they're going to be able to fully get out of the carrier of last resort is if they make that investment. But right now, it's a group called RCRC, Rural Counties Representatives of California, have been laser focused on making sure that this doesn't happen to rural communities that have had that lack of investment for a long time. Yeah. So we'll see where the bill goes in the Senate. It cleared the Assembly just a couple of weeks ago, but the Senate hasn't taken it up yet, and I don't know, quite frankly, whether or not they'll have the votes to pass it. But we'll see. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, so it depends on the road or the highway, which I know doesn't help you. So I'll give you a very brief. Are you okay if I sit? It seems a little weird to. Cool. So the way that we fund roads and highways typically in California is a number of different ways, but primarily by our gas tax. Right? We have a tax on road fuels that then goes back into local funding. 50% of it is allocated by the population for a jurisdiction. 50% is by the road miles that they have. That's a huge disadvantage for our area, but we can set that aside. There's a conversation right now about getting rid of that gas tax and replacing it with something that's more equitable. Because just like tobacco taxes, the more that you have efficiencies, or the more that people stop smoking tobacco or have more efficient cars, switch over to electric vehicles, or stop driving, utilize their bicycles or pedestrian ways in your communities, the less money is returned through the gas tax. It's not a sustainable way to fund your infrastructure. And so what you see right now across California is jurisdictions that really are suffering because people are driving less, which is a good thing, or driving more electric vehicles, which is a good thing, or taking their bikes, which is a good thing, which means that they're getting less gas tax coming in. At the same time, due to inflation and the costs for materials and for employees, the cost for these road projects continues to escalate. So there's a dichotomy that exists there of less revenue coming in and more costs needing to go out. So your local jurisdictions, like Sonoma County, have had to resort to passing a sales tax. At least at the state level, we've been able to make it so that you have self-help county status when you do that, that allows you to leverage additional resources that other places are not able to from the state or from the federal. Sonoma County actually has leveraged about 300% the local tax that you all have assessed on yourselves and reauthorized a couple of years ago to be able to bring in additional funding. But where the conversation needs to go and where it will go is replacing that gas tax with a more stable source of funding. And you saw the start of that a couple of years ago when electric vehicles got an on-bill charge when they changed their, or when they update their registration with the DMV, so that they are paying directly into it as well. Because for years, electric vehicles would use the roads but don't pay the gas tax, so it wasn't as supportive as it could have been. Outside of that, you have local jurisdictions like Windsor and the County of Sonoma that have property taxes and other forms of financing that they have to determine how much they can put into local roads or local highways. And I know that over the last couple of years, in particular, the last 10 or so, Sonoma County has really ramped that up to try to give additional assistance. Then the final component is Highway 101 or other state routes, which we have quite a few of them in our district, but especially in Sonoma County, where Caltrans is the primary on those projects. We actually have a piece of legislation that we've been working on where jurisdictions that are bisected by 101 or by other state highways, in state law, Caltrans takes the cost of that. They pay for it, except for the relocation of utilities. So if you have to move a water main, if you have to move your ADA, your signage, that all falls on the local jurisdiction. And in many places in our district, you have small public utility districts that only represent a couple hundred people, and they're being told that they, in order to get these road projects done, they're going to have to pay millions of dollars spread over those couple hundred people. It's not sustainable. So we've got a bill to fix that as well. But depending on which road it is, if it's a city road, it's your city council. If it's a county road, it's your board of supervisors. But also always feel free to contact our office, and we can help make sure that the right person gets that information. Yeah. What else? Yeah, go ahead.
So, my name's Bill Bridges, and here's one of my students from August of 2023. We spent tens of thousands of dollars to install rooftop solar.
Yep.
And we entered an agreement with the state.
I do.
We entered in with the state two main parts of the contract. One was to stay on net energy metering 2 for 20 years. And second was that whoever buys our house would also be able to use number 2. And then 2. We voted for AB 942 that eliminates that second provision. So value of our house would be reduced somewhat. It's hard to tell how much. But it certainly is breaking that contract we thought we entered into with the state with a lot of money. And I don't understand why you voted for that, especially since that bill was authored by a former lobbyist for Southern California Edison. It seems like it's slanted toward the large utilities.
Yeah.
So if you could explain your vote, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been a fight over the last couple of years around rooftop solar. So there's a study that the CPUC did on the utilization of solar and the impact that it has on utility rates for non-solar users. And I'll get to the actual bill in a minute. But what the study essentially said was that when we started solar, to incentivize people to put it on their roof, we created a net energy metering rate where they could utilize their own energy and then sell energy back to the grid. And that was a way to incentivize people to make this investment that would last for 20 years. What the studies show is that the investment is actually paying off in about 6 years now, much faster than they thought that they were. But then folks continue to pay or to sell back that energy. Still not a problem. But what the study found, and I don't necessarily agree with the study, so I'll just point that out. But what the study found was that folks who are using solar were not paying the same amount for the infrastructure that non-solar users were doing, because the way that your utility rate is actually calculated by the CPUC involves the total package to deliver the cost of that energy. It's called a GRC, a general rate case, that they roll it all together. So what the study found was that if you were using solar on your home, you were appropriately creating your own energy, but because you weren't paying the utility, you weren't paying for them to expand their poles, for their network, that was a cost that was being borne by non-solar users. So a couple of years ago, the CPUC created a new tier of net energy metering. And what they said was, we're going to lower the rate that you get by coming back. It's called NEM 3.0. And it's about 72% of what the rate was for the original NEM. and they said all new people are going to be in this new category. I wrote an opposition letter to that when I was on the city council as the mayor in Santa Rosa. This year, one of my colleagues introduced a bill to sweep everybody into that new NEM rate. Everybody. Whether your existing contract was before that NEM 3.0 was in place, just change everybody and break those contracts. So it came to the Utilities and Energy Committee, and I voted for it in the committee in exchange for her stripping out every single person that had an existing contract so that her bill would only apply in the instance that you sold your home. So if you had your contract in place, you put your solar in, you made the investment, you were untouched by the bill. That was an agreement that I cut with her to get my support in Utilities and Energy. I then also didn't vote for it on the floor. And she knew that that was the case, that I was giving her additional time to make this amendment, to continue to have conversations to see whether she could get there, but told her that I wouldn't be supportive when we actually voted for it on the assembly floor, so I didn't. But that's why, huh? Not on the assembly floor, no. So I voted for it in committee to get that amendment, to make sure that almost everybody was stripped out, but then did not support it on the floor. Yeah. Yep, correct. Yeah, and I was really honest with her at the time, too, that giving her additional time to work through the committee process didn't guarantee that she'd have my support if she didn't get it in a place that our community supported. And I have heard far more about that piece of legislation from our constituents in our district than any other piece of legislation in Sacramento this year. I think we got about 700 total comments on it. And so I just told the author, I said, this is bad policy and it's bad for my district, and so I can't support it. But was able to get that amendment at least. Yeah. I'd be really surprised if she has the votes to get it out of the Senate, to be honest. Yeah. Even stripping it down so that it only applies when you sell your home, that the new owner of the home moves into the new rate, I think even that is a precedent that the Senate's going to have a hard time setting. Part of the issue is it's not actually a contract. Yeah. No, trust me, I get it. I get it. We put solar on our home. I completely understand it. But that is part of the problem, is even if the bill passed, it would end up in litigation on whether or not there was a contract that existed. So, but ultimately I voted against the bill. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Keeping with the utilities, Southern California had some bad fires last year. It seems again we're having problems with electrical lines being kept on during wind events.
Mm-hmm.
You would think after 8 years we have a better control of wind to basically lower the power and lower the risk on fires, and yet we're still getting it.
So yes, and I'm going to do you one better, because it looks like in Southern California, the lines that they are looking at looks like may have been what they call ghost lines, which are lines that were set for decommissioning but had not actually happened yet, that the utility has already given up, saying that this is no longer going to be necessary, we're not going to use this line, and then it still ends up arcing. Correct, right. Right, so we actually just had a bill in committee this last week that would, for the first time, do an assessment, a study, and require a timeline for the actual decommissioning of those ghost lines. Because right now, the Public Utilities Commission only requires that they be designated for removal, but with no timeline associated with it. And so this was actually an issue in Sonoma County as well. So the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, they actually opposed this legislation. They said it would be a security issue if you identified all of these areas. And I told them in committee, if it's a security issue, you should remove them. So you'll see something in the next year or two, I think, on that, because that bill is flying through. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so we actually don't yet know the full extent of what's going to happen with FEMA. You actually can probably, for most issues that are federal, can start our answer with, we don't yet know the full extent because it's been so volatile. But we actually have a bill that we've been working through this year already to help local jurisdictions that have a disaster. The way that you get a state or a FEMA disaster declaration is based on the amount of damage that's done in a community, and that damage is actually assessed as a dollar figure. And so for many communities, like we represent Rio Dell up in Humboldt County that had an earthquake a couple of years ago, the property values are not high enough and the density is not high enough to where they reach the threshold for assistance. So we are already working through how to make sure that the state can step in and help folks who have seen their community completely devastated but haven't reached that threshold. And then you layer on top of that now threats from the federal government about completely eliminating FEMA at a time where you're having a massive disaster in Texas, where FEMA would be very helpful in their recovery and has been very helpful for us. We have seen FEMA be helpful in Southern California. And I'll talk about the fires for a quick second because it is still having a lasting impact on the state of California. When I took office in December, I was told, don't worry, January is usually pretty slow. You spend a lot of time in the district. And the governor proposed his budget, and usually his budget, we start to work through on the budget committee for a couple of months for discussions on what that looks like. And the day after he proposed his budget, the fires broke out in LA. And for those of you who remember the sequence of events in Sonoma County, some of the things that happened immediately was, one, their property taxes for those impacted areas were deferred for 6 months. And two, you have a reassessment of those properties so that it's the cost of the land or the value of the land, not the home, that the home is now gone and you don't pay property taxes on that. So given how high the property values were in the Altadena area, we already knew that the budget was going to be completely thrown out because you had a significant chunk of budget that was now deferred 6 months or wasn't going to be there for years if it takes people a long time to be able to rebuild. Then Trump comes into office, you have the tariff fights, you have other volatility, and one of the things that is not unique to California but is really important to know about California's budgeting is a lot of it is based on your sentiment. So a lot of our budget is based on sales tax, personal income tax, and capital gains taxes. And whether we're in a recession or not, if the public feels like we're headed towards a recession, what do you all start doing? You all start saving money. If you're a business, you stop expanding while you wait to see what the economic environment's going to look like. And all of that means fewer resources that come to the state and your locals. So you heard from the mayor the discussions around how difficult local budgeting was this time and how it'll continue to be. Part of that's being driven by this volatility that exists. And so FEMA plays a crucial role in not just helping the local jurisdiction that's been impacted to recover quickly, but also getting those property taxes and those property values back up to be able to support education, for instance, across the entire state of California. So we'll figure out how to address that from the California side, but we have a huge amount of liability when you just think about the amount of fires that we have. We also, with atmospheric rivers, we've seen an increase in flooding in California. Humboldt County had to do disaster declarations at the same Board of Supervisors meeting for both a drought and a flood. It was the first time we'd ever heard of that happening as well. So we know that volatility will increase in our climate, and it's a terrible time to be eliminating FEMA. And insurance rates, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I want to continue the budget conversation.
Sure, yeah.
I think everybody knows the Trump administration is putting out all sorts of programs
Yep.
that serve our most vulnerable population. One in particular that just happened is there's a building education fund for migrant education, after-school programs, money that was appropriated by Congress, and unilaterally they're just not authorizing money to be spent. So I'm interested in response to that particular need, and then the larger picture of funds being withheld from those who need them most.
Yeah, absolutely. Did everybody hear the question about the federal government withholding funding? So first of all, Congress needs to get a spine. It's very clear in the Constitution that they have the power of the purse, that when they say that funds are allocated, that they don't allow the executive government to just willy-nilly decide that they're not going to appropriate it, period. So that's where that conversation needs to start. And I will say, we live in a place where our congressmen are not the problem on that front. And one of the first votes that we took when I got to Sacramento was to give $50 million specifically to our Attorney General to be able to defend our funding and to defend our constitutional rights as a state. In Trump 1.0, the first term for Trump, California had to sue him 120 times, over 120 times, and we were successful more than 70% of the time. And the amount of money that we are able to defend that was attempted to be withheld from California far exceeded the amount that we spent in those lawsuits. So it was a net positive for our community, and it was also the right thing to do. So we gave additional funds to the Attorney General. He has been doing that, and he has been winning to make sure that funds can't be choked off from California. Now you see additional big picture items that we're really concerned about. Education is a huge one, but also health care. Medi-Cal, which comes down from Medicaid for the state of California, is about $800 billion. It's about a third of our budget. It is the biggest liability, and the federal government has been tweaking the requirements of the reimbursement rates for states like California. That is going to be a huge impact to us. So we'll fight that in the courts, but then we also have to figure out how best to plug those gaps, cover those holes here in California with our own funds as well. California is the golden goose. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard me say this before. We give $80 billion more a year in taxes to the federal government than we get back for the services that we're paying for. We are subsidizing lack of services in Texas and Missouri and other states that take more money. Texas, you would probably not expect this, is a receiver state. They get more money back in federal money than they pay to the federal government. There's an inequity that exists there. So we are having conversations at the state about how do we try to plug those holes while also understanding that our own constituents are already feeling a high cost of living, feeling overtaxed. Where are avenues to make sure that we can bring in that revenue and keep those critical services that are moving, whether it's education or healthcare? And I'll just tell you, I'm part of a small coalition of members who have made it very clear to the governor that before we touch healthcare or education, we're looking at other revenue measures. You have Assemblymember Damon Connolly, who represents the southern half of Sonoma County and Marin County, who is looking at, it's called Water's Edge designation, where international corporations in California get to select basically how they pay their taxes for the goods that they sell into California. We're one of the only states that allows two different systems or for them to designate. If we just taxed international corporations the way that Texas does, it'd bring in $2 billion extra a year for California. You have a member named Mia Bonta, who is the chair of the Health Committee, that is looking at the free rider problem, which is mega corporations like McDonald's or Walmart that don't provide health care for their employees, but instead enroll them in Medi-Cal, which puts a cost on all of you for their products, and having them pay a stipend to actually fund Medi-Cal in case there's tweaks. And then we are constantly looking at what tax breaks California has and the tax breaks that are being given at the federal level to see how we can best incentivize that money coming back locally. I'll tell you right now, we can't withhold our federal taxes. That's not an option that California's been able to figure out. But what we can do is look and say, all right, if you're Tesla, using them as an example, purely as an example, and you get a tax break at the federal level, then we have a corresponding tax at the state level. So they're paying the same amount, but it's redirecting our funds back to our state. Anybody want to guess how much money we give out in California in tax breaks every single year? The answer is $100 billion. About $100 billion in tax breaks. And two of the most effective social safety net programs we have, the Earned Income tax break and the Young Child tax break, are only about $2 billion combined between those two. So if you want to invest back in Californians, that's one of the areas that we're looking to be able to do that. Now, it's not easy. You have a governor who is potentially running for president who needs to market himself to other states. And you do have a number of, we call them the Mod Caucus, the moderate Democrats, who also are in those purple districts, that it's hard to get them to move on anything that's revenue related. But right now, when you look at what the potential coming down from Washington is, related to healthcare, related to education, related to climate funding, there's some ability to get some movement there, and we'll see if we can get something done this year on that. Yeah. What else? Yeah, go for it. Yeah, please.
So I work in real estate here in Sonoma County, and one of the biggest challenges we see is that a lot of cities are falling far behind on their housing production goals, especially when it comes to homes that young families and working professionals can actually buy. Many of these projects get delayed or derailed by not in my backyard opposition, local litigation, or environmental review processes like CEQA. And without new housing, we're also missing out on the property tax revenue that funds our schools, infrastructures, and services. So my question is, what is the state doing to help cities overcome these barriers and actually build more ownership-focused housing, not just rentals or deed-restricted affordable units? And how can we shift the incentive structure so local governments are rewarded, not punished, for approving the kind of housing that keeps our workforce and young families in our community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen your reels on Instagram. So quick plug. So the question is really around housing production. So every jurisdiction is given in cycles what are called RHNA numbers. They're Regional Housing Needs Assessment numbers. One of the challenges with RHNA that I'll just start with is that it's a little bit of a black box on how the state designates the amount of housing that places have to build. There's no methodology where Tanya can look at it and say, all right, I know 10 years from now we need to build the infrastructure or account for this amount of housing, just because it's not a very transparent process. But the state has figured out both how to provide the stick and the carrot for jurisdictions in those housing buckets, that if you don't meet that compliance, if you don't pass a general plan that accounts for the amount of housing that you need to be in a housing element to account for the amount of housing that the state needs you need to build, that you are subject to what's called the builder's remedy, which essentially allows a developer to build pretty much whatever they want on the properties that they own. And you see a couple of builder's remedies projects that are working their way around Sonoma County. Probably the most high-profile one is over by the airport, that the county didn't have an approved housing plan by HCD, Housing and Community Development, at the state, and therefore the developer can build their project under the builder's remedy. We'll talk about the builder's remedy in a minute, too. But then they also created this pro-housing designation that jurisdictions have been able to go after, where when they change their local policies to be able to facilitate housing at a faster rate and the right type of housing, they're opened up for an additional incentive package, funding that comes down that they're eligible for, or other types of perks. When I was mayor in Santa Rosa, by the time I was done, we had the second highest score in the state for the pro-housing designation. And that was without cutting out public voices on housing, but creating a more transparent process and a more facilitated process to move them through. When I talk to developers about housing projects, they really focus in on three aspects: time, certainty, and cost. Those are the factors that really determine whether they're going to be able to move a project forward. And the longer it's going to take for them to build, that adds cost to it. The jurisdictions that give them a hard time rather than telling them exactly what they need to build, those are jurisdictions that they typically don't look at because there's more volatility and they are shouldering the risk until they open their doors. And then the total cost is just a challenge. So even absent what we're seeing at the local level, right now one of the biggest factors that's preventing people from building is the cost to borrow money. That literally the interest rates are a challenge for developers who are already working on those thin margins to begin with, that until those interest rates come down, if they didn't already have their financing plan or their financing stack in order, they're probably not breaking ground on a project. What you did see a couple of years ago was across Sonoma County, more housing being built than pretty much at any time in my lifetime, because during the pandemic, interest rates were very low. It made it so that those projects were able to pencil out. They secured their financing, and then even though the interest rates had gone up after they'd been approved and broken ground, they already had that locked into place. So what we need to continue to do is facilitate a process that has a predictable outcome for folks. What we did in Santa Rosa that was really effective was to lay out essentially what we were looking for, whether it was through our general plan or downtown specific plans, and say to a developer, we've already done the community engagement. The community agrees this is where we need to go. If you build that, we'll get out of the way and let you build it. But if somebody wants to come in and build whatever they want to build and it doesn't have the community support behind it, you have to go through this full lengthy process. So that's something that I know Windsor and other communities have been working on as well.
It also
Yeah.
seems like beyond the cost to get financing, the cost of money essentially, there also now seems to be a requirement to build in the cost of pending litigation. Because it just seems, and that goes back to not my expert, but
Yeah.
you know, it just seems like every project that I've looked at, there has been a local group that just doesn't have housing. And I think that's what's frustrating for us as a millennial.
Yeah, I think that's both fair and unfair. What I will say is fair about it is you do see a lot of that. That is true. I don't know that that's actually one of the main factors. So the state has been moving in the direction of addressing CEQA, particularly finding ways to limit the time gap when you have a challenge that comes in. So this has been up until recently, up until the budget where we did substantial CEQA reform for the state. The approach has been, don't take away the tool for the local jurisdiction to be able to evaluate a project, but if there is a legal challenge, speed up the legal challenge so that the courts can determine in 60 days or 90 days whether there's a legitimate concern or not, or if it's just meant to hold up the development. So there's been that aspect of it. There will be a substantial challenge that's coming from some of the CEQA reform that the governor pushed through in the budget, where he included advanced manufacturing streamlining, and then it includes things like giant battery plants that just caught on fire in other jurisdictions, that if you waive CEQA for those, you end up having serious concern from locals about what's getting into my waterways, what's the impact going to be. So I think you'll see some fix on that. But you did just see in the state budget the most comprehensive CEQA reform since CEQA was passed originally for California.
And if you see, I mean, I understand CEQA has red flags for pulls it back into the full environmental review process, but if we see that starting to happen, do you foresee kind of this, I know that statewide property taxes are not necessarily a large form of revenue, but for local municipalities, they tend to be more, right? And a lot of local municipalities are suffering for budgets. Do you see a connection there?
Oh, there absolutely is. And this is one of the trade-offs that we made with Prop 13 as a state. We wanted to make it so that property taxes didn't go up too quickly on folks who are on a fixed income, who had retired, for seniors, for disabled folks. That was the trade-off, is that as a result of that, the value of property in California goes up, the amount that you have to pay for your taxes goes up slower relative to inflation. That's just a fact. And so that's part of a contributing factor for these local communities, that if you're trying to figure out how to deliver police and fire services in a jurisdiction and wages are expected to go up but are going up faster than things like your property taxes, that means that you have to over-rely on your sales tax. And that's why you see so many jurisdictions getting closer to their sales tax cap, is it's just frankly it's easier to pass a sales tax than it would be to go back and address the whole system, which is how we have it set up. So, yeah. JB, did you want to add something? Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
It seems like there's a lot of stalled projects, building projects in Windsor.
Yeah.
Notably the one that's the gateway to the town green behind that church.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is that a legislative issue? Is that a funding dried up issue?
I'll say it's probably not a legislative issue, to be honest. And without knowing the specifics on each project, it probably is a project by project specific one. You oftentimes you'll see, and just as a reminder, like the developers that are doing these projects really are putting millions of dollars of risk into starting a project that may or may not ever happen. That's why they really evaluate that time, the certainty, and the cost of the building, because otherwise that's a sunk cost for them and they can't recover it, right? And you saw that just play out in Santa Rosa just the other day, where the city had entered into an exclusive negotiating agreement to use one of their properties to build a project, and then that developer hasn't been able to perform, I think for 8 years, hasn't been able to move forward on it, so they bought the property back and they're going to go back out and try to find a different developer to be able to do that project. So it really is going to be case-by-case specific, but oftentimes it comes down to that financing, that folks, there are many different streams of funding at the state or at the federal level for housing projects of certain types. And oftentimes, if you're an affordable housing developer, there's a lot of money that you can pull in there. If you have a market rate developer, they're going to build whatever the market's going to bear. But it really is that missing middle that we talk about that doesn't have a lot of resources that go towards it. So if you're a city council member and you're setting the table for development, then what you end up seeing is a lot of low income, affordable that may or may not make it. Market rate's almost never a problem for folks. It's that kind of in-between piece that's there. I like to tell people I always found my job, now as a legislator, but also as a mayor, when I was mayor, was to set the table for a developer, not to cook their meal. That they had to work with the community to cook the meal. They had to find a way to make the project work. My job was to create the environment in which they could be successful and the community could be successful. But outside of that, there's a lot of risk and a lot of volatility, and especially when you look at the interest rates right now, it's just really difficult for folks. And I've asked developers, they all have a different number about what rate of return they would need to see on a project before they build it. It's actually not as high as you would think it is. It's usually, from my conversations with folks, around 12%. And so if you're shouldering millions of dollars of risk for years to get a 12% return on a project, you really do need a couple of factors to go your way to be able to build it. Yeah. Yep. Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question, and it is about housing.
Yep.
On Shiloh Road and Old Redwood, huge apartment building has got, it was in the process for many, seemed like years, but now, the road on, Old Redwood is, held up with fencing, temporary fencing. It's been that way for a long time. I called the city over and over again, and they said, yeah, the developer is responding to us, and wouldn't that be something that, I mean, it's a dangerous spot.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, I'm not getting really any answers from the city.
Yeah, so part of it might be, and I can't speak for the city, but we can help facilitate a conversation if you need. But we ran into this pretty frequently where constituents would ask us, well, why doesn't the city just do this with the property? The answer is because somebody else owns the property. It's their private property that they have purchased. And so long as they're not doing something that is against the city's rules, the city can't force them to do something else. What many cities have been able to do is look at dilapidated properties and put in place rules to require remediation if the person is holding the property, letting it, we call it demolition by neglect, where the building's falling down or you're attracting an unsavory element to it because you're not upkeeping it. That's a tool that they can have. But if there's a proposed project and they're trying to move forward, typically cities are reticent to put additional costs on the owner, just understanding that they're going to be demolishing and building something else there, that all of their money could go in towards doing that faster. But without knowing specifics, I can't get too far into it. But I'd be okay. Oh, it's not done yet. Yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah, absolutely.
So we are actually working to stop the certificate of occupancy for that building.
Do you want that microphone? Do y'all know Tanya?
So thank you. So the town is actually working to stop the certificate of occupancy for new occupants. We can't evict people who are there. We can't force the builder to do that, but we're restricting the certificate of occupancy until they fix that section of the roadway. So that's on the Old Redwood side. On the opposite side, on Shiloh, we're waiting for PG&E to come in and do conduit on that side. And so we are on their timeline, unfortunately. But for the actual Old Redwood, we are working on that. The town is working to get that fixed. We do understand that. They have fixed some of the fencing to make sure it's safe. I know it did fall down at one point, and that's been repaired. But please know that is on our forefront, that we are working with that builder to make sure that that's remedied. Okay, and I'm passing my card around, so anybody can please.
I observed, you live right near there, a woman with a bag of groceries trying to get to her place. And she had to go all the way around the fence and then walk off because it's really uncomfortable. If I had to be renting there, I would be really upset.
Yeah.
You can't go in your front door.
Yeah. And I do want to thank the council member for also mentioning the PG&E issue, because that is a significant one. And it's not just PG&E, it's every IOU in the state. We just happen to live in PG&E's territory, and they're easy to kick. But PG&E has had a hard time energizing projects, whether it's business parks or housing, because of a couple of factors. But one of the main ones is it's really difficult for them to get the transformer resources. Most of them come over from China. This is before the tariff fights. And so we have been talking at the state level about how to re-incentivize manufacturing of that transformer equipment or creating a strategic reserve of it, because otherwise you have projects that are sitting unable to have the power turned on for them for quite a while. We saw this with the Boys and Girls Club in Roseland. We've seen this actually, the city of Ferndale was told a couple of years ago, stop building any housing. We can't turn on the power for a while. So it is a significant barrier to getting these projects open. We typically are happy to intervene and call PG&E and see if we can do something about it, but really it's a resource issue that we're trying to correct across the state. Yeah, please. This is Councilmember J.B. Lee.
So I'm your council member in that area. I live in Oak Park, and I drive by that thing every single day. And I also took a complete set of pictures, did a complete report for John. I see John Davis, that's the town manager, obviously every couple of weeks or more frequently than that. And as Tanya spelled out very, very well, all of these pieces are moving along. It just takes quite a while. So with respect to the fences, I gave John that report. They opened the fence in one area. They cleaned up some other things that were messy. So little by little, it is moving along, and it will happen. Unfortunately, it takes some patience, but you're hearing all of it. It is definitely moving along. Just going to take a while. Okay, and if I can give you my card if you would like, and I'd be more than happy to be in touch with you all along the way. It's PG&E. It's PG. I don't know the answer to that one. That's the slowest part. Yeah, I was going to say before the fall, going on to August and after that.
So the other thing I'll say about housing really fast before we move off of the topic is the governor has said it's his number one priority is housing and homelessness. But then when he proposed a budget to the legislature, he literally zeroed out every single dollar for housing or homelessness. And the legislature had to put that back in. And part of that, I think, was him gamesing the budget process. He knew that there was no way that the legislature was going to not allow housing and homelessness dollars to flow to our local communities that rely on it. And so he could put in money elsewhere and make us make the tough choices. I think that was part of it. He also did the same thing with education, proposed an 8% cut to the CSUs and the UC system that we pushed back on, and they didn't get a cut this year. But that was particularly frustrating because the rhetoric that he was saying didn't match the proposal, and we had to come in and fix it, which we did. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the status of the casino? I know the state the federal government.
Yeah, I mean, so that's where it is it's in the hands of the federal government. Honestly, there's very little that your local governments can do at this point. They're a federally recognized tribe. We're actually getting an update on it in a couple of weeks here, but especially with some of the changes that have happened at the federal level that we've seen with the Trump White House, what we've been told is that it's really up to the federal government at this point. So, yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Sonoma State, I think the budget issues with Sonoma State kind of highlight a bigger issue of changing perceptions of college need and funding. And how do you guys see that moving forward for these regional colleges and the funding model as CSU?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I'm glad you asked that question. So the question was about, with SSU and the changing need for higher education, or how you build higher education. Is that fair? So with SSU, their challenge was declining enrollment for years while not actually investing in retaining or bringing in new students. And in fact, 10 years ago, SSU was turning away students, so they stopped recruiting from other areas and just thought people would want to come to Sonoma County, which I get. I'm from Sonoma County, and I get how amazing it is here, right? But it's also a high cost of living area, and if you are looking at what programs are being provided, you are looking at which ones are going to provide you the best bang for your buck for your future endeavors as well. What we are now requiring for the CSU system is that when they are getting ready to make cuts, whether it's cutting programs or cutting students, that they have to have a comeback plan. And that plan has to be based on a number of factors. Part of that is bringing in what the local workforce needs are, so that when students are choosing where to go, it's not just based on location, but also based on the programs that are being provided. Can I get a job in the area? And we know not every job needs a higher education degree. And in fact, you see construction jobs have continued to be stable through time, because there's always going to be that need. But what SSU was doing is they were making cuts without actually looking at many of the local workforce needs. And in fact, cutting the geology department when you have the geysers sitting right there, which is, you start with a six-figure salary coming out of college. That is a really attractive feature for students who are trying to figure out where they're going to go, what they want to do, and how they get stable in a community. When we talk about housing and when we talk about long-term sustainability for our community, it is not lost on most of you. Young people have a hard time living here, that it is a high cost of living area, and it is even worse if you are not from here. The prospect of moving here to a high cost area and getting established is difficult. And oftentimes people stay rooted when they have significant life events that happen in a location, including getting married, having a kid, buying a house. These are the things that keep people rooted in the community. And Sonoma County is an aging population. The university needs to be as responsive to that as our local governments are, to make sure that we are retooling what programs are being provided to give a sellable reason for people to come here, not just because it's Sonoma County. We already went through this up in Humboldt with Humboldt State, where they had to retool into a Cal Poly university to be able to provide that extra oomph for people to come up the North Coast. There are 6 other CSUs right now that are struggling with their enrollment as well, that they're going to have to look at how best to deliver programs to attract students and make sure that they are able to build back up their numbers, because their funding is going to be suffering as well. What we did with SSU when we provided the $45 million in the state budget was really enumerate specific programs that we see as emerging opportunities from talking to our local business communities or talking broadly about what the needs of California's workforce is going to look like, to be able to really invest in those and bring people here, whether it's healthcare, whether it's AI and data security, the programs that are going to matter the most for folks. And now going forward, not only did we do the $45 million in the budget, we did some policy reforms where every other CSU, as they go through this declining enrollment, are going to have to make that discussion and that plan, that comeback plan, before they can make those changes. We're not done yet. There's still more that we're going to be doing for SSU. And we have additional policy bills that are coming either next year or in this year's trailer bills for the budget. So you'll see more of that. But there are a couple of more reforms that are coming for sure. But good question. Yeah, please.
Do you have insight as to where the state stands right now on modernizing and or updating the rate approval process for the Department of Insurance?
So the question was updating the rate approval process for Department of Insurance. I don't know specifically on the rate approval process, but we do have a number of insurance reforms that have been working their way through. You have a whole package of bills being proposed by the insurance commissioner working with the legislature. Things from allowing or requiring a discount on your insurance if you make investments in your home for home hardening to reduce your risk and your community's risk. Some funding for local fire safe councils to do the same thing. Allowing insurance to use catastrophic modeling rather than just to look back at what's happened in a jurisdiction, but actually looking at the conditions that exist on the ground now, which will be a significant change for them that the insurance industry, quite frankly, has been asking for a while, that they can be more forward-looking at what the risk level is instead of just painting all of us with a broad brush because we live in the same zip code. And they've been looking specifically about diversifying where their covered properties are. So when an insurance company pulls out of an area, oftentimes it's because they have overprescribed the homes that they are going to insure in that area, which means that their risk profile is much higher than it would otherwise be. So if you were an insurance company who only invested in Santa Rosa and then the Tubbs fire happens, you have significantly more risk on your books, and it's harder to keep your rates lower. But if you had a couple homes in Santa Rosa, a couple in Windsor, some in Southern California, and you diversified that portfolio, that was easier for you to weather for the industry to be able to keep your rates lower. So they're looking at how to do that in a more efficient manner. There is a bill that would require that if they're going to cancel your insurance, that they actually tell you how you would need to be able to make changes to your property to get reinsured, so that they can't just blindly cancel folks, but actually give them a path forward. We're re-bolstering the FAIR Plan, which is the insurer of last resort, that's seen about a 300% increase in people sliding into the FAIR Plan, to make sure that that continues to be a safety net. And ultimately what this all comes down to is the legislature is really working hard on availability of insurance, and there's going to be a question around affordability, but right now affordability is the secondary challenge to keeping those insurers in the marketplace. Other states have much higher insurance rates than California does. But still in California right now, between cost of insurance, cost of energy, it's a second mortgage for most homeowners. It's making it really challenging for people to live here. Yes.
I
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having a police officer here as your council member can give some credibility to this. Our local law enforcement relies on having those relationships with these communities to be able to keep our communities safe. And that's why the state and many of your local jurisdictions have already gone through and decided that our local police forces will not participate in ICE immigration enforcement. Not only is it not their charge, not only can the federal government not require us to use our resources to do immigration enforcement, but it also harms their personal relationships with the communities and makes their jobs ultimately harder. That's already in place, and that'll continue to be in place. Just yesterday, a judge responded to a lawsuit from California and said that the way that ICE is conducting raids in Southern California is illegal, that they are racially profiling people, detaining them without probable cause, and denying them due process. So we'll continue to fight in the courts. We're also passing bills at the state level to make sure that folks' due process rights are able to be respected. That's where one of the challenges comes in, where because the state has had pretty strong laws on this already, what we have seen from the federal government is that they are coming up with excuses to grab people and then quickly move them out of the state of California so that way those folks are denied their due process rights as well. We've been working to slow that down to make sure that there's proper documentation, and we have continued to invest in our local immigration attorney network to make sure that folks have access to an attorney if they need one. But ultimately, it's a really scary time to try to figure out how to protect our communities. And regardless of how you feel about immigration, I think we all should be able to agree that due process rights matter and that infringing on anybody's due process rights is not something we should be doing in a democracy. What we've seen over the last week or so is an escalation where ICE agents are going in and raiding cannabis farms and using that as the justification that even though, by the way, the statistic we heard just the other day is about 70% of those who have been detained so far have no criminal record. So now they're using cannabis farms and saying, well, cannabis is illegal under the federal government, so therefore all of these workers are doing something that's illegal. And that's been their justification to go in as well. Obviously, we saw the deployment of military into Southern California. Thus far, they have, from what we've been able to observe, they have not fully crossed lines that they are legally not allowed to cross, that for the most part they are standing at federal facilities and protecting those buildings. It's a show of force and it's meant to be intimidating, but under federal law, those military agents are not able to be engaged on civilians for the purpose of immigration enforcement. So far, we haven't seen them really push past that line, but we'll continue to monitor it and make sure that they don't. Really fast, in the latest fight, just a couple of days ago, Health and Human Services put out a new directive rescinding previous guidance that said that health facilities could treat undocumented folks. Now they are saying that they can't. And what we know is the impact that will have on our local communities is that folks who are undocumented will instead have to use the emergency room for their care. It'll be a poorer standard of care, and it will ultimately cost us much more. So, yeah. Sorry.
Following up on that question, do you know the position of Sonoma County in terms of participating in the ICE program where local law enforcement can sign up with ICE to supposedly protect the agents while they
So I'm not familiar about that specific, but Sonoma County law enforcement, sheriff's office, our local police departments, all of them have confirmed that they are not participating in ICE immigration. Now, what individuals, and it's not just officers, it's anyone, does in their own time, they can do in their own time. But on the job, wearing a uniform, there is no participation amongst our agencies. Yep. What else? Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
I know Smart Train just got some new funding.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could comment on the future of that and part of if you know anything about the Link 21 program to get all trains in the Bay Area connected.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with the Link 21. I'll start there. So before I got elected to the State Assembly, I chaired the Sonoma County Transportation Authority and the Regional Climate Protection Authority, and I was on the board of directors for SMART. I am a SMART optimist. It's had its challenges, but we continue to see it advancing slower than people wanted. But we now have a train in Windsor, which is just a huge thing to celebrate. And you actually see SMART breaking its own ridership records quarter after quarter, and that was even before we added Windsor for the ridership. If you look how SMART compares to other Bay Area transit agencies, our ridership recovery since the pandemic has been off the charts relative to other agencies that are worried about to hit the fiscal cliff for transportation. So that's all positive. SMART does have to come back for a reauthorization of the sales tax measure. They're coming back next year. I hope folks will support it. It's been really good for our community. But the California Transportation Commission just about a week ago did their next round of funding. SMART received a significant chunk of money, I think it was $81 million, that now has Healdsburg fully funded. And the way that it's worked for SMART is every time we move to a new station and secure the funding, we start working on the next station. So there are already plans in place working towards getting the train to Cloverdale. Healdsburg's now under construction, ready to go. I think it'll take about a year to get to Healdsburg, and then we're securing, I think it's about $350 million that we still need to go to get to Cloverdale. But then also something that happened a couple of years ago that's pretty significant is the state added SMART into its master rail project. And while the sales tax that we all pay for has a mandate to go north to south, to go from Larkspur to Cloverdale for connectivity, the state put us in their rail plan connecting SMART across Highway 37 and getting to the Capitol Corridor as well. That opens us up for additional rounds of funding to be able to do that. While we talk about what to do with the 37 update, so you've got a long-term project and you've got an interim project that's proposed. Long story short, 10 to 15 years out, we expect that it'll be underwater if we don't lift 37. They're talking about both lifting it and expanding it, adding 2 lanes, one in each direction, and then at a small cost of about $2 billion, they think they can get the SMART train across 37 as well. I'll hold my breath on that one. I'm not a SMART 37 optimist. I'm a SMART to Cloverdale optimist, but there's a path there for that as well. Yeah. Oh. Okay, perfect. Yeah. And then there's also a couple of other programs that you should be aware of. One is called the TIES study. It's the Transit Integration and Equity Study that the County of Sonoma did a couple of years ago, where we are looking to integrate our bus systems first and foremost. So you have 3 bus systems. You have Santa Rosa City Bus, Petaluma Transit, and Sonoma County Transit. They are working through how to make it one seamless system. You have 3 separate workforces, which is a challenge. You have 3 separate rate structures, different marketing for each of them, and you'll see systematically they've been changing that. So all of the rates have been standardized. The websites will all look the same. You'll have an app that'll integrate them, and then ultimately the last part will be figuring out how to probably creating 3 different branches of the same union representing the three workforces, but they're working towards that to find efficiencies and try to build out our bus system. Once that's in place, then we'll include things like SMART into that discussion about integration as well. Yeah? Yes, please. Yeah, no, absolutely. So it didn't fall off the map per se. It's doing its job. So it's getting its environmental clearances. It's starting to build out different parts of the path. I was up in Blue Lake not too long ago, which is the northern terminus for the Great Redwood Trail. That city is so excited for it. It's going to be huge for them from a tourist perspective, as well as different aspects along the way. So it is underway in construction, and they're trying to make sure that they just move it forward. There's an agency that was started, the Great Redwood Trail Agency, that has a new executive director. So it's full steam ahead on that. Yeah. What else? Great. So then I'll mention one of the other things that we're working on up in Sacramento. Actually, a couple things we're working on up in Sacramento. One, we have taken on one of the most substantial fights in our office as a freshman legislator, but really one of the biggest fights, where we are tackling the cost of prescription drugs. Our communities really rely on our health clinics and on Planned Parenthood to deliver services. There's a federal program called a 340B drug program at the federal level that gives prescription discounts, and then the savings on that are reinvested into care. It's a huge chunk of money for rural health clinics, and again, really starved for health resources in many rural parts of California, especially Northern California. It is the #1 bill that the pharmaceutical industry has been trying to kill this year because that savings comes from their profits. We also have significant pushback from some of the labor unions that are trying to organize the health clinics. So it's been a really fun one for us, and stay focused on that one because it would be pretty significant if we were able to get this one passed. And then I've been working very closely with my colleagues on the reauthorization for the cap and trade program for California, which not only is reducing our greenhouse gases from industry, but also then the credits that come from that are being reinvested into climate programs that we've been able to be pretty successful in bringing dollars to the North Coast to do as well. Is there anything else that's on your all mind collectively? Yeah. Well, and especially when you see the funding that was put into the federal budget specifically for ICE, this is going to increase. I mean, that's just the assumption that we all are making. And the hardest answer whenever we do these town halls is that we cannot prevent ICE from doing their job. There's nothing that the state or that the locals can do to interfere with ICE legitimately doing their job. What our job is to force them to have proper due process rights, to make sure that they have probable cause, to make sure that we are putting in place protections for our community and making sure that we are addressing the impacts. I mentioned that 340B drug program that we're fighting to help protect. One of the limitations pharma has been putting on it is requiring all of the medicine dispensed to come from one clinic. Well, if you're ICE, what we have seen is that they have been staking out those one clinics that do this discount drug program to try to grab people as they get their medication. So we need to be creative about finding other ways for people to access their medication. We know that immigrants have not been showing up to work because they are concerned that that's where a raid is going to take place. So we've been advancing policies to try to help with that, with online work to the extent that we can. The big issue is going to be around privacy. We have a number of different bills that have been working their way through to make sure that ICE can't access things like sensitive health information for immigrants, where California said a couple of years ago, if you sign up, come out of the shadows, we'll help make sure that you get health care. And now we have a whole registry of folks who have done so that is going to be used against them if we don't help protect that data. And so those are the areas that we're really focused on. But ultimately what this is going to come down to is enough people getting Congress to do their job and regulate. And that means organizing in districts that aren't our district, ultimately. As I mentioned, our Congress members for the area, Jared Huffman and Mike Thompson, have been great on the issue. But ultimately, we need to put pressure in red districts to make sure that those representatives understand that it's not a bipartisan issue to call for due process and to call for probable cause before you treat people in a way that's been completely inhumane. Yep. Yeah, I'll say I agree.
And I'm white, I'm not afraid, but I'm afraid for my
No, I hear you. Not even just as a representative, but as a resident here in Sonoma County. Some of my best friends are undocumented. My wife is an immigrant from Scotland. And so when you attack birthright citizenship, we don't yet know what that means for her. Like, this touches everybody in every community in some way. And it is terrifying. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. So on that note, yeah. Any last questions? Otherwise, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time on a Saturday morning to come out here and have the discussion. Like I said, it really is helpful for me to be able to go back and have conversations with my colleagues about the things that matter the most in our district and in our beautiful corner of California. I really do use that for anybody who watches the committees or the floor sessions. You'll hear me frequently talk about the things that we hear from our constituents here. If you ever have any issues with state agencies, whether it's the Department of Motor Vehicles or the Franchise Tax Board, please contact our office. We're always happy to help. That's part of the job, is making sure that the government works for you. I've got a couple of staff folks here. We've got Monica Berrigan right here in the back, who's our local field representative. Scott, I think, is in the front. Scott Alonso, who's our district director. I mentioned we go all the way up to Oregon. So we have offices in Santa Rosa, Ukiah, and in Eureka. We have 3 staff members for those 3 offices, and they work their tails off on behalf of these communities because it's where they grew up, and they want to make sure that it succeeds. So please don't be a stranger. We'll continue to do these town halls, and we do coffees as well, just to provide that opportunity to have these discussions and hear from you, and to try to answer questions that you might have. But always feel free, interact with us on social media, call our offices, send us a message. We are here to serve you. So thank you so much for being here today.